Jumpin' In on Manx Radio.
With Howard and Chris Kane.
Hello.
Good evening.
And welcome. Indeedy, here we are again, Saturday night on Manx Radio, 9 o'clock. It is your time for Jazz Fest, jumping in the best in modern and contemporary jazz sounds around. I'm H.
And I'm Chris. Yes, welcome along to this week's Jumpin' In as August draws to a close and the schools are almost ready to start the winter term. Can it really be September next week?
Yes.
Give it a few days and the witches' hats, pumpkins and probably Christmas wrapping and crackers will be in the shops too. On the plus side, there'll be no more arguments over those wet summer staples, Monopoly and the game of life. We nearly came to blows there. And why aren't we having picnics and barbecues this summer? But I suppose Cadbury's eggs will be back soon too. So what late cropping fruits have been floating around in your pims this week, H?
Well, we got some rare noise in as much as what you get if you combine Georgian music, microtonality and jazz. Stay tuned. Some old and new dreams from none other than Pat Metheny. And Django Bates, we haven't heard from him for a while.
And from me, well, we skip a couple of seasons, follow Buzz to the stars, start over, and to get things going, another family favourite. Here's the Video Game Orchestra. Hang on to your hat. with fabulous arrangements of the music from Super Mario 64. That was the Video Game Orchestra with Hang On To Your Hat, the title track of their recently released album. Given that a lot of video games today are produced with bigger budgets than Hollywood movies, it's perhaps natural that the music should find its way into the big band canon. With a band made up of some of the finest session men Nashville has to offer, I think that may be the first time I've had both my kids ask.
Nashville? Oh.
Yeah, Nashville, unusually, but they are both big centre of music still, of course. I've had both my kids ask what I'm playing as they recognise it from somewhere. By hook or by crook, I'll convert them yet.
You hope. Dream on. Dream on. Well, this will put them off, I imagine. I know it'll put off our Luxembourg correspondent, I imagine. Microtonality. We come across it every so often. There's a great album we played last year, I think it was, or earlier this year. I lose track after a while, which had Jack DeJohnette on drums, with some microtonal jazz. Here's another one from our friends at Rare Noise Records, and thanks to Lee for helping us out with these ones. And yeah, I rather like these sounds. It's one of these ones where you have to have open ears, as they say, microtonality. Very big in the East. We've never got our ears around it. In the West is the short and sweet way of looking at it, I guess. The spaces in between the spaces we're used to. So this is a mixture of, it's sort of Georgian jazz, so there's some Georgian chant and whatever on that in places, so I'm not going to hear any, I don't think, on this track coming up. They tend to be sort of short interludes in between sometimes. And it's Georgi Makadze who's playing microtonal keyboards, David Vajinski on the fretless guitars, and he likes messing around with microtonals as well. And then Panagurias Andreo on the fretless bass, and the slightly easier to pronounce, Sean Wright on the drums. Have a listen to this. stuff. I do like that one, I must admit. I do like it. Elisa, that track is called, from Georgi Mkadze, Georgian Micro Jams on the Rare Noise record label. With, Georgi there on the keyboards, and I say Dave Faczynski on fretless guitars, and also the Ensemble Bassiani with the great sounds and that sort of Georgian chants, and there's more of that throughout the album as well. You don't mind a bit of the old microtonality?
No, not at all. And in fact, with a lot of Asian and Indian music, we've heard that, of course, and perhaps more familiar with it in that context. But I think also, if you look back to the classical genre, when before we started to have, when we had true tone instruments, before we started to get valve instruments, for example, in brass, and the piano gave the ability. We had a lot of different tonalities where they were all per key rather than flexibly available to change across. It's just a rigid way of thinking, isn't it?
It is.
Or you could argue that they simply can't play in tune. But there we are. Now, with more than 100 albums as a sideman, with names such as Phil Woods, Gary Bartz, Robin Eubanks, Lee Konitz and Christian McBride, it's perhaps surprising that pianist, organist, trumpeter, drummer and educator George Colligan isn't better known. We featured a quartet album of his, more powerful, a couple of years ago, I think now. Very fine that was too. Well, his latest is in a more intimate trio setting. Here's Up Jumped Spring. Lovely stuff there, recorded live in the Arklow Methodist Church, County Wicklow, as part of Bray Jazz Festival's On the Road series back in 2018. That was George Colligan giving a vigorous workout on Freddie Hubbard's classic Up Jumped Spring, in the company of a fine Irish rhythm section of Darren Beckett on drums and David Redman on the bass. A bit of a reunion, that, for Colligan and Beckett, as the two spent quite considerable time working together in New York in the 90s. Darren originally went over to the Big Apple to study jazz and ended up staying for 20 years. Just out now, anyway. The album is live in Arklow, George Colligan, and it's a swinger. Well worth a listen indeed. Thanks to Ubuntu for sending us that.
Yeah, live in Wicklow. That's a first, isn't it? I don't think we've had music from there before. Village Vanguard and Wicklow. You get it all on this programme, I tell you. It is, of course, this programme, Jumpin' In with Chris and myself. H, great to have your company as ever. Do drop us a line anytime if you've got any thoughts, anything you'd like to hear, any new reviews, any ideas, or any artists you might like featured or something.
Anything you don't like.
Anything you don't like. Preferably, you know. We prefer the bouquets, of course. But you can just send it to Howard Kane at manxradio.com or Chris Kane at manxradio.com. And, of course, that Kane is Caine. E.
And by bouquets, he means either drinkable assets or a cake.
Yeah, take the drinkable assets would be nice. Here's one, a little feature we haven't done for a while. Old and New Dreams. We'll take an artist and we go to both ends of the spectrum when it comes to their musical career, and none bigger, I dare say, in modern jazz than Pat Metheny, or Pat Metheny, as some people pronounce it. Pat Metheny's always been to me, I must admit. And here we're going to hear two tunes with a mere 44 years between them, 1976 and 2020.
Hello, I'm Jasper from Phonesis. You're listening to Manx Radio with Chris and Edge.
from his latest 2020 album, which had rave reviews. Pat Metheny and From This Place, one of the albums he'd been waiting for years to make, full orchestra, full-on production, as you can imagine, and a track called Same River. Has had rave reviews. There again, I think so did, well, certainly in latter years, Bright Size Life, his very first album on the ECM record label, 1976, when I think he's still about 19 years old. Pat with the great Jaco Pastorius on bass and the wonderful Bob Moses on the drums. Actually, I think that still sounds fantastic as well. And we were just debating as we were listening to that. Still, I mean, they're both really good, and there's still no doubt he's an amazing player, so prolific and still touring, COVID-19 allowing, of course, like mad, even though he's now, still wearing his stripy sweater, but a little bit out of his teens. A wonderful player and an inspiration to so many, and again, a great crossover artist. Those who aren't into jazz will have some Pat Metheny albums and really enjoy it. His days with Lyle Mays, wonderful stuff. His free side, doing some of the Ornette Coleman stuff as well, of course, Song X, which I hated at first but really like. And then these sort of albums, these big production orchestral numbers, which you do have to listen to a few times. I mean, they sometimes seem relatively saccharine compared to some of his other work at times.
I think that's what puts me off a little bit. I don't dislike it. I wouldn't put it as my top Pat Metheny album, and I do hanker back for the days with poor old Lyle, who's sadly no longer with us. Now, jumping off to the jazz clubs of Manhattan for another live set, which I wish I could have been. Recorded at the Iridium, which I know is one of your haunts, H, but still on my to-do list. Here's drummer Mike Clark and his sextet with Of Infinity. See if you can name any of the band.
Oh, I love that chord just fading away there. Django Bates from his beloved The Study of Touch album. It's one of a series of these with his two long-time associates, Peter Eld on double bass and Peter Brun on drums, and Django based out in Copenhagen, I think, has been for quite some time. I think that's right, neck of the woods, where he's a professor of music or improvisation, I think, at the university or the consortium there, or in the college there. I can't remember what it is, but I'm sure he definitely teaches, and he's at that neck of the woods after years, of course, with the likes of Loose Tubes and playing on the British jazz scene. And he's got a new one coming out fairly shortly, I think, is it?
Tenacity? In October, with the big band. Tenacity, it's called.
Ah, yeah, looking forward to that. I know I'd spotted that, and I thought we haven't heard from Django for ages. And yeah, very un-Django-esque, that last track. He's usually very quirky, but I rather like that one. Before that, live from the Iridium.
Before that, what a great night it must have been. Mike Clark driving things along from behind the kit with a lineup working through Of Infinity. He's perhaps best known for his funk work with Herbie Hancock and the Headhunters on some of their best-known 70 releases, and then with British jazz rock experimenters Brand X filling the seat originally filled by Phil Collins. Yeah. But he's obviously right ahead with a straight-ahead set with his group Indigo Blue. Do you want to hazard a guess at any of the lineup?
Well, I thought it might have been Chris Potter, but it wasn't.
Not Chris Potter, but I'll put you out of your misery. Frontlining there, and what a great night, as I say. Frontlining Donald Harrison Jr. on alto.
Ex the Messengers, of course.
Ex the Messengers. Randy Brecker on trumpet.
Brecker Brothers.
Rob Dixon on tenor also.
Can't place him.
And a rhythm section. Christian McBride on bass.
Ex Everyone.
And Antonio Farrow on the piano. And of course, Mike Clark on the drums. And thanks to Rope-a-Dope for sending us that album. Well, as the Summer Jazz Festival season draws to a close in silence, we hope we can get back out to them next year, particularly Brussels, which has become a regular feature in our calendar, where we once might have caught up with this man as a boy. Kazimir Libirski, who, despite having a Russian-sounding name, hails from Brussels originally and was a regular on the European festival scene by the age of 13. At 18, Berklee Jazz College of Music picked him up on a presidential scholarship, the first full scholarship they'd ever offered to a European, and quite an honour. And whilst there, he studied with Fred Hirsch, Brad Meldo, Danilo Perez, amongst others, but one of his biggest influences was his private mentorship he received from Ornette Coleman. The album's called Cosmic Limity, and Kazimir pushes his trio through a series of arduous jazz rock workshops. Here, on this track, mainly on piano, is New Life. See you next week.
See you next week. We'll be speaking to Maria Schneider, and we'll try and bring you that chat as well with John Beasley.
Look forward to that.